Alrighty, this is not ESPN's 30 for 30, but it is my 98 for 98. The 98 seasons in history of the New York Football Giants, and we're up to 1953 already, which just happened to be the 29th season in the history of the New York Giants. 29th season in the history of the Giants, 34th season in history of the NFL. The Giants started in 1925. NFL started in 1930, so 1920. So the Giants are 5 years younger than the NFL is. So the 1953 season was rather disappointing, rather sad, because the Giants lost, after the season was over. I mean, they were not a good team. After the season was over, you can read. I'm gonna read over some things here from Wikipedia. So it's reading through Wikipedia. It's kind of tough to say exactly what happened, but I'm going to give a little props here. A little shout out to Steve Owen, who was the Giants coach, the longest tenured coach. He coached for 23 seasons for the Giants, which will probably stand quite possibly, unless, they said somewhere along the line, in the next 100, 200 years, if Bill Belichick pops around and winds up coaching the same team for 300 years, like Bill Belichick's doing with the Patriots. But chances are, especially in New York, it's a little tough neck of the woods to coach, especially at long stretches of time. But not only that, but you have to be good enough to last for 23 seasons nowadays, and that's pretty tough. So it looks like Bill Belichick might be doing something like that, but it's going to be very difficult in New York. So Steve Owen, who coached the Giants from 1931 to 1953, 53 was the 23rd and final season. Just might quite possibly be the longest tenured head coach in the history of the New York Giants, period, from now till all of eternity. He also as of right now, has the lead. When he retired, he had 150 wins, which, could be passed, especially, back, when Steve Owen coached, there was only 12 games. Now they're up to 85 games. Just kidding. But, there's a lot more games now, 17. And, it was 12 back when Steve Owen coached. So if Steve Owen in 23 seasons coached an additional 5 games a year, he might have another 60, 70 wins. He would probably have well over 200 wins. And then it would be very difficult to catch him. But even so, look, just take Coach Brian Daboll right now. If he would have coached the Giants for 15 seasons and averaged 10 wins a season, he would just catch. So that's 10 wins a season for 15 seasons. And the way it is nowadays, you have like back-to-back losing seasons. There's, a lot of times that, you're gone, and, it's going to be very, very difficult for somebody to catch Steve Owen. He, and not only that, but he also played for the Giants as well. As I said, referring back to as far as Wikipedia, I'm going to go over both. But one says that he retired. The other one said he got fired. So I'm gonna read his Wikipedia page right now, and it'll say where he retired. So that's Steve Owen, American football. Let's see. He was born on April 21st, 1898, passed away in 1964. He was an American football player and coach. He earned a place in Pro Football Hall of Fame as head coach of the National Football League's New York Giants. I don't know. Here it says from 1930 to 1953. He was not a head coach for the Giants in 1930. That was Leroy Andrews. Actually, I'm going to fix that. It was Leroy Andrews and Benny Friedman were the coaches in 1930. So he was not the coach in 1930. Says Owen's skill at designing defenses, his fundamental centered approach to the game, and his innovative A formation, a variation of the single wing, also helped his offenses thrive and were key to his success. His personal style was memorable for his odd, his voice, and easy disposition to go with his perpetual tobacco chewing. Apparently, he liked to chew tobacco. Let's see here. After football and his playing career. Let's see. The team slipped to 8-5 in 1934. This is but the Giants still made the championship game, facing the 13-0 Bears. The Giants came in as huge underdogs and trailed 10-3 at halftime. This was the sneaker game. The Giants would wind up winning, 30-13. Then in 1938, let's see here. The Giants won their second and last title under Owen in 1938 with a 23-17 victory over the Green Bay Packers, despite being outgained in yardage 379-208. They got 9 points on 2 block punts was the margin of victory. So, 1950, the Giants faced a powerful new foe, with the rival of the All-American Football Conference, Cleveland Browns. Yeah. Owen was the host of Pro Football Highlights on the Dumont Television Network from 1951 to 1953. And then sadly, right here we have with Steve Owen, after the Giants slipped to 3-8 in 1953, Owen announced his retirement. So here it says he announced his retirement. I'm going to read where in 1953 on the New York Giants page where he got fired. So, but he announced his retirement as head coach days before the end of the regular season, ending his 28 years on the field with the Giants as a player and as a coach. And it's just a little sad here. As the final minutes ticked away in his last game as Giants coach, a late game loss to eventual champion Detroit, because Detroit wound up winning the championship 17-16 this particular season over the Cleveland Browns. The game was televised, and television cameras showed him standing all alone on the sidelines in tears. His record as coach, he was 150, 100 losses, and 17 ties. And his 150 wins are still the most in franchise history, and probably, quite possibly will be. Owen remained with the Giants as a head scout during the 1954 season. He served as a collegiate spring practice assistant, first at South Carolina and then at Baylor. He returned to the collegiate ranks full-time in 1955 as an assistant coach at Baylor. Just weeks after the end of the 1955 season, the Philadelphia Eagles hired Hugh DeVore as head coach and added Owen as an assistant soon after. But 2 seasons of struggling in Philadelphia led to the entire coaching staff's dismissal, and Owen eventually became a head coach yet again, this time on an interim basis with the Canadian Football League's Toronto Argonauts in September 1959. The Argonauts declined Owen's offer to stay on as a full-time coach for 1960, but retained him as a scout and advisor before he moved to the CFL's Calgary Stampeders in 1960 as an interim head coach. But as in Toronto, Owen was replaced at the end of the season. On December 29th of the same year, he was named head coach of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, a CFL team that had won just once in 1960. Owen's 1961 team nearly reached the playoffs, then did so the following year and was voted CFL Coach of the Year. But after suffering a heart attack late in 1962, he resigned on January 6, 1963. Unable to stay away from the sport, however, he soon came back as head coach of the United Football League's Syracuse Stormers on March 20th, 1963. After an 0-12 season, Owen returned to the New York Giants that November to scout for the team. But that did not last long either. Owen was stricken with a terminal cerebral hemorrhage on May 1964, just about the time I was born. I was born in April 1964. And so his hemorrhage was a month after I was born. After 8 days in critical care, Owens died at the age of 66 on May 17th, 1964. In New York. He was buried at St. Patrick's Cemetery. Owen was inducted into the Professional Football Hall of Fame as a member of its fourth class in 1966, which was enshrined in September 17th. That was head coaching record. It was just, they only had so many losing, his final season he had a losing record. They only had 1932, they had a losing record. 1936, they were 5-6-1, so 32 and 36. Then we had to go to 1945, I believe it was. Yeah, they were 3-6-1, and then they had back-to-back losing seasons in 47 and 48, and then his final season he was 3-9. So he only had 6 losing seasons in 23 years. They won 2 championships. They went to multiple other championship games. There's a thing. There's some articles you can read and all of that where they have like the missing rings for the New York Giants. You can say there was anywhere from 2 to 3 missing ring seasons with the Giants. 1944, they lost 14-7 in the championship game to the Green Bay Packers. The Giants were at home. They played in the Polo Grounds during the regular season. At the Polo Grounds, they beat the Packers. Well, the Packers season ended, and the Packers had basically like a whole month off before the championship game. They were able to rest their players. The Giants played up to the week before the championship game. The Giants had multiple players injured. One was not able to go. Another one went in there and tried to go and only lasted like a series and had to come back out. Some of the better players for the Giants. So the Giants were banged up, and the Giants had no rest before the championship game. As I said, the Green Bay Packers had a whole month off to rest their players. Had the Giants had a month off to rest their players, quite possibly the outcome might have been quite different. 1946 is another missing ring season. The Giants lost 24-14 at home in the championship game to the Bears. Two of the Giants players were paid off to throw the game. It was a scandal. One guy didn't play. 4 of the Giants' best backs were injured. One of them was injured during the game and had to get taken to the hospital. The other 3 backs, the top 3 punters were all injured. As I said, one of their backs got injured during the game. The other 3 best backs were injured before they couldn't even play in the game. And their other player, Frankie Filchak, was the other player who got paid off to throw the game. He threw 6 interceptions during the game. Yeah, so either the Giants' best players were either injured or their other best player was the one who got paid off to throw the game. And he threw 6 interceptions. One of them got returned back for a touchdown. Things were different. Quite possibly the Giants might win that game. The 1933 championship game, the Giants were leading 21-16. It was played in Wrigley Field. The Bears scored a touchdown on a hook and lateral play with under like 2 minutes left to go in the game. The Giants still had the ball. They marched back down. They had a couple of chances. There was a guy who was wide open on one play. It was a trick play. He was wide open. I think the halfback threw the ball didn't throw a good pass, and the guy was open, possibly in field goal range, could have caught the pass. Maybe they could have kicked the field goal and won the game. The Chicago Bears kicker, I believe it was Manders, kicked 6 field goals in 13 games the whole year. Kicked 6. Won his championship game, he kicked 3 in one game. The chances of kicking 3 field goals in one game are rather remote back in 1933. Well, it happened to the Giants back then. So, so it's just a lot of missing ring seasons. He took the Giants to multiple championship games. They lost the 33 championship game. They lost the 35 championship game. They lost the 39, the 41, the 44, and the 46 championship game. He took them to 2 playoff games, which would decide to see what teams would go to a championship game in 1943. They had a playoff game against the Redskins to see who would go to the championship game. Giants lost that one. 1950, they played the Cleveland Browns in a playoff game to see who would go to the championship game. The Giants lost that one. So the Giants had a lot of hard luck in the championship games. But Steve Owens, he was he went up with over 150 wins, for the Giants. Said the Giants will be, tough to beat somebody coaching 23 seasons. So this is the Wikipedia, all right, for the New York Football Giants season, 1953. So I want to read this where it says that he got fired. All right. The 1953 New York Giants was this franchise's 29th season in the National Football League. The Giants were looking to improve in their 7-5 record from the previous season. While each year from 1950, they got a little worse. They were 10-2, then they went 9-2-1, I believe it was, and they went 7-5, and then 1953 they were went at 3-9. The Giants hit rock bottom in 1953, losing their first 3 games in the season on their way to a disappointing 3-9 record and a 5th-place finish in the division. The season included a 62-14 loss to the Browns, the 62-point being the second most points surrendered in franchise history at the time, as they get given up 63 points the year before to Pittsburgh when they played on the road. In Pittsburgh, they lost 63-7. Let's see. Head coach Steve Owen was fired at the end of the season. So that's what it says here. After his departure, rumors emerged that future legendary coach Vince Lombardi was a candidate to replace him at the next head coach. However, the Giants ultimately settled on Jim Lee Howell, who played for the Giants, while Lombardi was hired as the co-offensive coordinator. So the Giants, almost had Lombardi. Before the end of the 1953 season, the New York Daily News had a headline in the paper that Vince Lombardi was the top candidate to become the Giants' new head coach. Although the Giants' co-owner Wellington Mara was a classmate of Vince Lombardi at Fordham University, the Giants were actually interested in Army head coach Colonel Red Blake. Blake had declined a job, but recommended Lombardi, who was his offensive coordinator at Army. Despite being Red Blake's top aide, Vince Lombardi was anxious and frustrated. 3 other Army assistants, including Murray Wormuth, were now head coaches. In June, Lombardi had turned 40 years old. Lombardi would be hired as the offensive coordinator in the 1954 season for the Giants. So they settled with Jimmy Lee Howell instead of Vince Lombardi. So unfortunately, it came back to bite him, because you can imagine if Vince Lombardi coached until 1969. He passed away in 1970. He was the coach of the Washington Redskins at the time. He would have coached for the Redskins in 1970, but he wound up passing away. But you can imagine if the Giants had Vince Lombardi as their coach in 1954, and say he coached from 1954 to 1969 when he passed away, the Giants would have won many more championships. Many. Unfortunately, in that time period from 54 to 69, they only won one. They won 1956. So, but they had very good teams back then. They had very good players. Very, very good players. And actually, during that period of time, they were 1-5 in championship games. They won 1 and then they lost 5 in a row. Well, Vince Lombardi was the coach, they wouldn't have lost 5 championship games. I can almost promise you that. All right, let's go to the 1953 NFL season. It wound up being a good season. It wound up being an exciting season. The 1953 NFL season was the 34th regular season of the National Football League. The names of the American and the National Conferences were changed back to the Eastern and Western Conferences, which is what they were before. They had been before 1950. 1949, back in the 40s and the 30s, it was the Eastern and the Western. For whatever reason, they changed it to American and National. The Giants were in the American Conference. But meanwhile, a Baltimore, Maryland group headed by Carol Rosenbluth was granted an NFL team, and it was awarded the holdings of the defunct Dallas Texans organization, who can trace their lineage to the Dayton Triangles, founded in 1913, thus sending Rosenbluth a franchise with a tenuous connection to being the final remaining Ohio League member. The new team was named the Baltimore Colts, after the unrelated previous team that folded after the 1950 season, and kept the blue and white color schemes of the Triangles Texans franchise. The 12 teams of the NFL season continued for the rest of the 50s. These teams became known as the Old Line teams as they predated the 1960 launch of the American Football League. The 1953 season ended on December 27th with the NFL championship game. The Detroit Lions defeated the Cleveland Browns 17-16 for their second year in a row. The year before that, the Detroit Lions won 17-7. The draft. The 1953 NFL Draft was held on January 22, 1953 at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia. With the first pick, the San Francisco 49ers selected defensive end Harry Babcock from Georgia. Major rule changes. The definition of illegal motion is clarified. A player must be moving directly forward at the snap to be considered illegally in motion. Interesting. All right. The Browns were almost undefeated. Almost undefeated. Let's see, they were 11-0, and were spoiled by a 42-27 loss in the finale on December 13th. So they were the good team. Let's see here. They lost to the Philadelphia Eagles at Philadelphia, 42-27. But the victory before that, on December 6th, the 11th game, the Cleveland Browns beat the New York Giants 62-14. Yeah. The Browns were a very, very good team, but it was just, the Giants were just not. Basically the Browns kind of ran away with the division. The Browns wound up, they were in the Eastern Conference. The Browns wound up 11-1. The Eagles were in second place at 7-4. The Giants wound up 3-9. In the Western Conference, the Lions were 10-2. The 49ers were 9-3. 1953, the former American National Conferences of the previous three seasons were renamed the Eastern and Western Conferences, respectively. The Western race saw the Rams beat the Lions twice in Detroit, October 18th, and LA, November 1st. And at the midway point in Week 6, the Rams were a full game ahead of the race. In Week 7, the 49ers beat the Rams, and the Lions won their game to put all three teams at 5-2-0 with 5 games left. In Week 8, the Lions beat Green Bay, while the Rams were tied by the Cardinals, and the 49ers lost 23-21 to the Browns. As both teams won their remaining games, San Francisco was always a game behind Detroit. In the Eastern Division, the Cleveland Browns won their first 11 games and led wire to wire, clinching a playoff spot by Week 10. Their shot at a 12-0 regular season was spoiled by a 42-27 loss in the week season finale against the Eagles, and was tarnished further by the championship game loss to the Lions 2 weeks later. Yeah, the Giants, they were just, they're rushing. They averaged 2.6 yards a carry. They had 6 rushing touchdowns all year. Let's see, they threw 16 passing touchdowns, but they threw 34 interceptions. They ran the ball almost 400 times for about 1,000 yards. 2.5 yards a carry they averaged. 2.6 yards a carry. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. They let's see, they as usual, they always start their first few games on the road because they shared the polo grounds with the New York baseball Giants, and they want to make sure this baseball season was over with, and at any possibility of a World Series, the Giants made the World Series, which they did in 53. I think they made the World Series, in 1954. Well, anyway, the Giants wanted to make sure, the football Giants wanted to make sure that, the regular season, baseball season, and the World Series was over with. Oh, what's up, Teddy? I like the part San Francisco fell. Yes, they did. Yep. San Francisco failed a long time. It wasn't until 1981 when they finally had any type of a success in the playoffs. Yeah, they failed. They lost 1970. That was 1971 to the Cow. They lost 1970 to the Cowboys, 1971 to the Cowboys, 1972 to the Cowboys. They lost another playoff game, I believe it was in 1957 to the Detroit Lions. So yeah, the 49ers had it rough. But when the 80s rolled around, they really started doing well. Let me tell you what, the 49ers with Walsh as the coach and Joe Montana as the quarterback, they really started doing good. But the 49ers had it rough back then. I had a good team, but they were games short. But the Giants' first 3 games were all on the road. They lost the first game 21-7 on the road against the Rams. Week 2, they lost 24-14 on the road to the Steelers. Week 3, they lost 13-9 on the road to the Redskins. Then they finally came home and they finally beat the Cardinals. That was their Giants' first win. So the Giants were 1-3. They beat them 21-7. Then they went on. Then the Browns came and they lost to the Browns 7-0. Let's see. Then week 6, they went on the road and they played the Cardinals once again, and they won 23-20. So now the Giants are 2-4. But then the Giants lost to the Eagles the following week on the road. On November 8th, they lost 30-7. Then they came home and they lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers on November 15th, 14-10. Then the following week, they lost to the Redskins at home on November 22nd. They lost 24-21. Then they actually beat the Eagles, who were a very good team that year. They beat the Eagles 37-28 at home on November 29th. Then the final 2 games the Giants would lose. They lost 62-14 to the Browns on Sunday, December 6th. That was in Cleveland. And then the final game of the season, where they said was about a couple minutes left to go in the game. Steve Owen was by himself on the sideline. The television camera, I guess, zoomed in on him or whatever, and he had tears running down his face because basically it was over. His coaching career was over. They lost to the Giants the last game. The Giants lost to the Detroit Lions the final game of the season on December 13th. They lost 27-16. So the Giants wind up 3-9. Just all in all, bad season. Jimmy Lee Howell become the Giants coach in 1954, and better times were ahead for the Giants, that's for sure, because not only it was Jimmy Lee Howell became the coach, Tom Landry would become the Giants defensive coordinator, Vince Lombardi would become the Giants offensive coordinator. Vince Lombardi was the Giants offensive coordinator for 54, 55, 56, 5 seasons, 54-58. He was the Giants offensive coordinator. Tom Landry was the Giants defensive coordinator until 1959. Jimmy Lee Howell was the Giants coach until 1960. So then the Giants started getting better players. They drafted well. Where are we at here? The draft. All right, the Giants. Let's see here. There was 30 rounds. 30 rounds. So each team got to pick 30 players. It was 8 Hall of Famers were selected. Giants took Bobby Marlowe in the first round, a halfback from Alabama. Second round, I'll just do the top 10 picks for the Giants. Eddie Crowder, the Giants took in round 2, quarterback from Oklahoma. The Giants took Cal Roberts, a tackle from Gustavus Adolphus, wherever that college is at. Cal Roberts in the 3rd round. 4th round, the Giants took Dwayne Douglas, a tackle from Florida. Round 5, the Giants took Buford Long, a back from Florida. Round 6, the Giants took Bob Piviani, a guard from USC. I'm going to go over the top 10 rounds, and then I'm going to go to round 27 and show you the Giants' greatest draft pick of all time. Round 7, the Giants took Don Branby, an end from Colorado. Round 8, the Giants took Don Beck, a back from Notre Dame. Round 9, the Giants took Jim Gray, a back from Panola, wherever that's at. In round 10, the Giants took Charlie Malloy, a quarterback from Holy Cross. They took 2 quarterbacks in the top 10 rounds, and neither one did absolutely anything. So let's go to round 27, shall we? And take the reason why this is the greatest draft pick in Giants history is because it was, guys, a Ring of Honor, Hall of Famer, but he was selected in the 27th round. Quite, one of the, quite possibly the greatest offensive lineman the Giants have ever had. Andrew Thomas might give him a run for his money, but the best ever for the Giants. So we go around 27. Let me see. I forgot what pick number he was. Pick number 321. Now, obviously, the draft, the scouting and all that is far different, but with pick 321 in the 27th round of the 1953 NFL draft, the Giants took Rosie Brown, an offensive tackle from Morgan State. Hall of Famer, the greatest draft pick. It's easy. With the scouting, you can say Lawrence Taylor, but they took him number 2 overall in the 1981 draft. The scouting department knew of him and all of that stuff and everything. Well, imagine taking somebody, who's like basically your best offensive lineman probably ever in the 27th round. To me, that's the greatest draft pick in the history of the Giants. Came in 1953. So the Giants were slowly building through the draft. All right. They selected Kyle Rote in 1951, Frank Gifford in 1952. They took Roosevelt Brown in 1953. So they're building through the draft. They took Charlie Connolly, their quarterback, in 1948. So they're building. Then they made some trades along the way, to build their team. So the Giants were slowly building a little, a really good team that would go to many championship games. They go to the 56 championship game, the 58, the 59, the 61, the 62, the 63 championship game. So the Giants would go to, from 1956 to 63, they would go to 6 championship games. So good times were ahead for the Giants, just not the 1953 season. And then finally, the 1953 NFL championship game between the Cleveland Browns and the Detroit Lions. It was the 21st annual championship game. The championship game started in 1933. That's when the Chicago Bears beat the New York Giants 23-21 in Wrigley Field. Championship game was held on December 27th at Briggs Stadium in Detroit. The defending NFL champion Detroit Lions, 10-2 of the Western Conference, were led by quarterback Bobby Lane and running back Duke Walker, and the Cleveland Browns, 11-1 of the Eastern Conference, were led by head coach Paul Brown and quarterback Otto Graham. The game was a rematch of the previous year, which was won by the Lions 17-7. This was the Browns' 4th consecutive NFL championship game appearance since joining the league in 1950, and the Browns would go to the 54 and 55. So the Browns would go to the when the Browns entered the NFL in 1950, they would go to the first 6 NFL championship games that they were in, from 50 to 55, and it would be 3-3 in those championship games. Let's see. And the Browns were favored by 3 points. The Lions were attempting to become the 3rd team in the NFL championship era since 1933 to win 2 titles in a row, following the 1940 and 41 Bears and the 1948 and 49 Eagles. The home underdog Lions rallied in the 4th quarter with a late touchdown and conversion to win by a single point, 17-16. The 2 teams met the following year for a 3rd consecutive title matchup. All right, we got game summary, just real fast here. The Lions struck first with a Doak Walker touchdown, a 1-yard run, and both scored field goals in the 2nd quarter, and the Lions led 10-3 at halftime. The Browns scored 13 straight points in the second half to take the lead. So good game, back and forth. Trailing 16-10 with 4 minutes and 10 seconds of playing time left, the Lions started at their own 20-yard line, down 16-10. And fought their way for 80 yards in 8 plays, the touchdown coming on a 33-yard pass from Bobby Lane to Jim Dorn in the end zone. And Walker's extra point gave the Lions the lead. Trailing 17-16, the Browns had one last chance. Ken Carpenter started the drive with a run to his own 28, but an Otto Graham pass intended for Pete Brewster was deflected by rookie defensive halfback and he intercepted the throw, clinching the Lions their 3rd title. their third NFL title. They won in 1952. They won this year in 1953. Then they won in 1935. They beat the New York Giants 26-7 in Detroit. So this is the Detroit Lions' third NFL championship. So it was a good game. We wound up 17-16. I guess the Lions score was probably about 2 minutes or so to go in the game. The Browns had a chance. All they needed was a field goal. They had a decent field goal kicker with Lou Groza. If they got within 40 yards or so, he had a good chance of maybe kicking the field goal, but it's just not meant to be. So it was a good season. It was it was an exciting season. All in all, but I mean, unfortunately, it was just not a banner season for the New York Giants. What do we got? Lions won. Dick Elbow is a winner. Detroit had no coach. Briggs Police Station was our police station in Los Angeles. Left tackle. You play all line. All right. There you go. Oh, the Giants could have used you in 1953 because they had no O-line. They couldn't run the ball. So if you ever go back in time to 1953, make sure you play O-line for the New York Giants because they can use you. Let me tell you what. But the Lions would win again in 1957. And the Detroit Lions have not won a championship game since 1957. So what is that? 43, 53, 63, that's 65, 66 years. So the Detroit Lions, like 66 years, but the Cardinals have not won a championship since 1947. So the Cardinals are around like 75 years. So Cardinals and Lions are way overdue. The Cardinals ain't winning no championship this season, but the Lions, I'm not saying the Lions are going to, but the Lions are good, might be good this year. So I'll have to wait and see. But the 1953 season was sad. It was the end of a great coaching career for for Steve Owen, who coached the Giants for 23 years. It was not a good season for the Giants, being a 3-9. But as I mentioned, the coach Jimmy Lee Howell was going to be their coach. He played for him, and he became their coach in 1954. Some guy by the name of Vince Lombardi would be the Giants' offensive coordinator, and some guy by the name of Tom Landry would be the Giants' defensive coordinator starting in 1954. So the Giants were 3-9 in 53, but things would start changing. And within a few years, the Giants would be back in the championship. And not only in a few years, they would be back in the championship, but they would win their fourth NFL title. Now, it's also not forget, I mean, when you start thinking of like Bill Parcells and Tom Coughlin, we have 4 Super Bowl trophies. 2 from Parcells, 2 from Coughlin. Well, let's not forget the original El Doso came from Steve Owen, the 1934 and the 1938 championships that the Giants have. Steve Owen was the coach. So he's the original twosome. So we owe Steve Owen quite a bit. He had a lot of good years with the Giants, a lot of victories, a lot of championship games. Unfortunately, we only have 2 championships to show from it, but it was a lot of good football. So it was sad. Sad. It was an end of a 23-year coaching career for Steve Owen of the New York Giants. But it's a bad season, but better times were ahead for the New York Giants. Well, that pretty much wraps up the 1953 season for the New York Giants. They finished 3-9, and Steve Owen would coach no more for the New York Giants. But I'll be back again with the 1954 season for the New York Giants with a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, and the 1954 season just happened to be the 30th season in history of the New York Giants. I'll see you then.